Good morning. All right, so I wanted to change the order of what we intended to do, where we were supposed to go over chapter 15, but instead we're going to go over chapter 13 first, and that's careers in therapeutic exercise. There's a very specific reason I'm doing this, and the reason is after seeing all of your responses about dream careers, uh, the vast majority of you are looking for a career in therapeutic exercise and more specifically in physical therapy, which we'll get to at some point. So I think this chapter is going to probably be the most beneficial for the majority of you. All right, so let's kind of jump right in. Skip this slide. Don't worry about this. Let's just jump into the meat of it. So you know, uh, with regards to this chapter, there's several careers we're looking at, and it's not just physical therapy. It could be occupational therapy, athletic training. The book even mentions strength and conditioning specialists as a form of therapeutic exercise to an extent. Having said that, being a gym owner, I can only give you guys my experience and what I do with my clients. What I always tell my clients when they come into my gym, right? Athlete, adult, somebody looking for weight loss, weight gain, whatever it is, we sit them down and we kind of go over what it is that we do. What I always tell them is that the injury rate is 100%, right? So I sit them down, I give them a little spiel, but at the end of it, I always tell them the injury rate here is 100%, and this is no different than anywhere else. On a long enough timeline, right? If somebody's going to train with me, or on a long enough timeline, if you're going to have a client for whatever reason, right, they will experience some type of impairment at some point. Now, that's coming from a gym or personal trainer standpoint. When working with, let's say from a physical therapy standpoint, at some point, you guys are going to have setbacks. You can put forth the best recovery or therapeutic plan ever. That's evidence based, where you're working with other professionals and whatnot. But for whatever reason, there might be setbacks where there's a re-injury of some sort, or there's a setback with regards to the same injury, whatever it is, right? It's going to happen, right? And I do think it's important when working with people that they're kind of aware that, what you're doing isn't 100%. Like you can't guarantee somebody something like you can't guarantee improvement, right? Um, so there's certain things, whether it's trauma, overuse, aging, there's going to be various things that are out of your control to some extent. Having said all that, I do think that, again, I'm a gym owner. There's always a need for therapeutic exercise. I think there always will be. Me being a gym, and what I do is definitely much more of a luxury, if you ask me. Especially, in the current landscape of a pandemic. What I do is a complete luxury. When people now might be struggling, especially considering I'm a boutique gym, they're much more likely to cut their expenses. Their expenses being me, somebody, they pay between 110 and $170 a month on the most likely thing to go. Therapeutic exercise, on the other hand, is really a necessity. There's going to be people that they need to be able to, get up from standing. If they have a knee replacement, therapeutic exercise is an absolute must, right? So one thing that I think in terms of benefits for career-wise, right, is that you have much more security in the truly therapeutic exercise worlds, again, PT, OT, than in the health and fitness worlds, right? So a lot more job security, right? So what are we looking for with therapeutic exercise? We're typically talking about programs to restore and or improve function, right? We want to restore that ability to live, right? Those activities of daily living. Now, when you're providing care, right? Typically we have five core competencies, right, for patient care. The first is patient-centered care, in that you have to give respect to the individual, to their values, to their beliefs, to whatever they're what's going through. You have to create a plan that's catered towards them, not just this preset plan. So just because you know, the textbook says like you should do this, right? It should be catered towards the client. It might not be appropriate for, maybe it's a psychological reason or whatever else. Interdisciplinary teams is a big one. Uh, so I'll just say this: I've had to really change my view a lot over the past few years, and I think early on, so it's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect essentially states that as you get into a field early on, you think you know everything, right? You have this initial burst of knowledge, and you think you know everything, but as you get deeper into your field, you realize you know very little. And I was very much so victim of this. And now the more I read, the more I realize I really don't know much, right? And what am I trying to get at here? Well, early on, I would be very dismissive of doctors, physical therapists, and even I'm still guilty of this to an extent today, but I do like to think I'm much better. Um, what I've realized is you really have to work within a team to get people back to 100%. So what am I saying? Interdisciplinary teams could be a physical therapist, it could be athletic trainer, it could be a strength and conditioning specialist. And I missed the top. The top is like a medical doctor, an orthopedic of some sort. And you guys have to work together. So there has to be communication. There needs to be, most importantly, no dismissiveness of other people's practices. So, like for me, for instance, I work very closely with the athletic trainer at my local high school. And even though sometimes I might disagree with her on some of the things she does, I will never openly critique her in front of an athlete, because the athlete needs to have confidence that the people around her are doing the things to kind of get them back on the field in my world. So if you're at a gym, you should never be you should never be openly critical of anyone else within that interdisciplinary team. Okay. And this goes the other way as well. If you're the physical therapist, if you were the medical doctor, right, you have to empower your client to have faith in those other people. I do say from the top down. So we'll say that medical doctor really should empower, right, your client, and they give them the belief that if you put them in the hands of a specific strength and conditioning coach, that they're going to do the right things to kind of get you back to where you need to be. Okay. I've talked about evidence-based practice repeatedly. You guys can see how important it is, where information is continuously changing. And based on this, like, research that's constantly changing, you have to apply quality improvements. So what you see, right? And also this needs to be employed in practice, right? Like, let's say you're applying some type of protocol to a client, whatever, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you see little to no improvement, or maybe you possibly see regression, right? Well, you need to um, refine the process, so to speak. And as far as uses informatics go, that's the information that's available to you. Okay, so understanding the key difference between rehab and so rehabilitation and habilitation, I think is very important. So therapeutic exercise is really the combination of rehabilitation, and habilitation. So the use of systematic and scientific info to improve muscle strength, endurance, flexibility, so on and so forth. All right, but what's the key difference here? The basic key difference is that rehab is the restoration of function that someone once had, as opposed to habilitation, which is improving function to standardized norms. So I'm going to just pause for a few seconds. Think about that. Knowing those definitions, rehabilitation being the restoration of function that someone once had, versus habilitation, which is improving function to standardized norms. Give me some examples. Right? Give an example of each. Think about it. Right? Pause the video, whatever. We'll move on to the next slide because we talk about these things. Right? As far as rehab goes, um, you know, we could be looking at a lot of different things, but typically for rehabilitation, right, restoring function, there's usually some type of trauma or injury that we need to get them back to. It could be chronic trauma as well, or chronic injury as well. So we have both passive and active forms. Passive being something like heat or ice, stim, whatever it is. Active forms would be like manipulation, exercise, perform and you could think of progressions like, somebody performing a squat, an assisted squat, holding on to something, a squat to a box at a certain height, which is very high, then you lower the box, and then they do an air squat without anything. That could be all forms of active manipulation or exercise. A key distinction when working, so the text then starts to go into different populations. So with regards to athletic injury, typically you're going to be a little bit more aggressive than the general population to get them back on the field. And one difficult aspect of therapeutic exercise when working with athletes is that you're not just trying to restore function, but you have to merge this with skill acquisition. So, let's just say somebody has, we'll say a torn ACL, right? So no longer are you just trying to get them to perform activities of daily living, right? But you have to get them to run. You have to get them to cut. If they're a basketball player, all of a sudden they have to run and cut while dribbling a basketball, while being able to shoot a basketball. So all of these things have to be merged with the skill of that sport. So we've talked about rehabilitation. We've talked about habilitation. Now we can talk about prehabilitation. So this is often used with athletes. It really should be used with everybody, but it's often used with athletes. And the goal of prehab is to develop as much strength, endurance, muscle, and whatever before a surgery, right? And we found that through research that if you go through a really aggressive prehabilitation process or training, right, it's going to enhance your ability to return to sport faster, right? So here's a case in point. I had a young girl. She's got multiple surgeries on her knee, so she had just injured her knee again. Her surgery was scheduled for the end of January. She came to me in early December, maybe late November, I'm not quite sure. But she came to me and said, hey, my doctor wants me to do as much lifting as possible before my surgery. This was prehabilitation. So sure enough, we put her through a 2-month training program. And, as odd as it sounds, she was still fully capable of squatting, deadlifting. It was cutting and sprinting that really gave her issues with her knee, and her doctor approved all of these things, squatting and deadlifting. So we actually trained her for a powerlifting meet. So she trained for a powerlifting meet, meaning she trained heavy, she lifted heavy. She competed in a powerlifting meet in early January, and about 2.5 weeks later, she went for surgery. I forget the exact. I don't think it was AC. It wasn't ACL, but it was a surgery that had a 6 to 8 month recovery timeline. So you can see how important prehab can be, and how oddly enough it can be used. Where a girl has a knee injury, but she's actually still training for a powerlifting meet, which was at the time I thought was unique because I haven't done anything to that extent before when working with an athlete. So these are just some other examples of where rehab might be used. Post-surgery, where we're trying to restore function, cardiopulmonary with the elderly, and more often we forget about the psychological benefits. In this class, we talk about the psychological benefits, but again, when you get out there in the real world, sometimes you just think of what's tangible and in front of you, right? But sometimes you guys forget that, like, oh, by just them getting into the PT office, or by just getting them and giving them a plan to go out and just walk, jog, right? There's many, many psychological benefits. So then we kind of speak a little bit about habilitative therapeutic exercise, where once again we're trying to get back to standardized norms, standard function. So for your average person, we have an idea of what standard function is, but we have specialized habilitative exercise as well. So what does this mean? You've got sports teams, police and fire academies, military. I've have trained, plenty of police officers to get ready for standardized tests, and that's really habilitative exercise where they have to run a mile and a half in whatever it is, 12, 13 minutes, 15 minutes for females. They have to do X amount of push-ups in a certain time. And there's these standardized norms, which are, in some cases pass fail. With sports teams, right? I mean, this is essentially habilitative exercise. I might have a collegiate female soccer player say, "Oh, my coach says uh, as soon as we get back, we're put into a 1 mile run test, and if I don't run the mile in under 6:30, we're off the team." Right? Like that's a standardized norm for their sports teams. Another easy way to think of that is in high school, right? In high school, we used to have the Presidential Fitness Awards, and you would have to hit a standardized norm to achieve that, right? So the goal of this is to get these people to these standardized norms. Um, the obese population, where we're just trying to get them to a reasonable BMI, in this case 20 to 25, which helps restore day-to-day function. If you're operating with a BMI of 32, 34, 35, you are more than likely going to be impaired to some capacity in your day-to-day living. Right, so you guys should at this point get the idea of 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 getting people to standardized function. You could have developmental problems with kids, general fitness. Again, that's just a general adult where they should be able to go out and walk without being short of breath, things like that. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit just about some of the differences, which are pretty much apparent. Inpatient versus outpatient, right? So inpatient simply means somebody staying for an extended stay at a facility. So extended stay is just simply overnight, right? So overnight could be a hospital or it could be a long-term care facility like a nursing home, right? And typically their level of function is going to dictate the amount of care or the length of stay that they're going to have. All right, so if somebody is having some issues, um, you know, where they can't even stand, they can't feed themselves, right? More than likely, these stays are going to be longer than somebody who might have to simply stay for one night. Outpatient simply means no overnight, right? So no one stays overnight. Physical therapy, sports medicine, cardiac rehab. Some of these might be a little bit more specialized facilities than other. You might have a sports PT. I mean, cardiac rehab could be just within a hospital, something along those lines. Uh, as far as outpatient goes, it could also be where a physical therapist is sent to a home. There's sometimes, for whatever reasons, somebody's, while they're more than capable of taking care of themselves, they might not be able to get to some of these facilities. So in that case, the therapist might be sent to the house. The last few slides are on the different careers. So this is kind of related to your end of the semester assignment. All right, so this is really where you should be reading these sections, and most of you have already read these sections because a lot of you, or you've all submitted your rough drafts already. Um, so I don't need to spend a tremendous amount of time on this, but an athletic trainer, as you guys know, based on my interview with Tara, is you could have a career in high school, colleges, professional organizations. Um, and you need to understand the key distinction between an athletic trainer and a physical therapist. And just like we said with Tara, where athletic trainers are spending more of their time on prevention, right? When they're on the field, they're also trying to manage and treat injuries on the field. So they're I think early on when we have freshmen or sophomore in the program, they're not 100% certain, especially if you weren't in a sports program in high school, you're not 100% certain of the role of an athletic trainer. Because it sounds like, oh, you work with athletes and you train them. Well, it's more so on managing and treating injuries, and the goal is less so on improving performance, right? So that's more so for like a strength and conditioning coach, or obviously the coach on the field. You do need to attend a school that is accredited. You do need to be licensed, and the key distinction between now and whatever it was 5, 10 years ago is now that by 2022 you have to have a master's degree. right? So that's a major difference. So you can no longer just have an undergraduate degree and get licensed. So the next is a clinical exercise physiologist, and we don't talk about that a tremendous amount in this class, but it is a career that you all should be aware of because it could be something interesting for a lot of you guys. One of the major benefits of this career is the lesser requirements for education. So for AT, you need a master's, OT, you need a master's, PT, you need a doctorate, right? So to become a exercise physiologist, right, you simply need your bachelor's and a certification through ACSM, right? So there are three levels, which will also dictate your level of pay. So the first bottom level is an a certified exercise physiologist. The second level, again, you still only need your bachelor's, is a clinical exercise physiologist. And then the third level is where that distinction is, where you do need a master's to be a registered clinical exercise physiologist. Now, I mean, the first thing that should jump out, and I put these in bold because at the end of the day, we do care about income, was that what your annual salary looks like. So the first two, I think the first one was 53,000. Now we're looking at 49,000, um, and now we're up to 80,000 here for an occupational therapist. With all of these salaries, as some of you guys have noted in your rough drafts for your career projects, is that uh, the location of the job obviously comes into play. So, an occupational therapist in New York is much more likely to earn more money, more income than somebody in, let's say, Nebraska or something along those lines. So, geographic location plays a significant role in income. So what's the difference between OT and PT? We've talked about this before. Usually we're talking a little bit more about fine motor skills. So like hammering, typing, right, things you do with your hands like that. OT does require a master's. However, I do kind of throw this out there to some people, OTA, PTA, um, so occupational therapist assistant, physical therapy assistant. These are alternatives for some people. I mean, at this point, if you're in this program, you look like you're getting your 4-year degree. But let's just say, you're a freshman or sophomore, and let's say a sophomore happen to be taking this class, um, and you just decide, okay, maybe college isn't for me right now. An alternative might be getting your associate's degree and going to like a 2-year university or 2-year school that can help you get your OTA, right? It usually an OTA is going to make slightly less income, but it's going to be the most important thing is that it's going to give you experience into the world of occupational therapy to see if you're interested in it. You have to be licensed in your state, and you must pass your board. All right, physical therapist. So I have to throw this out there, and it's a must. Um, most of you are interested in physical therapy, right? You have to be careful. I teach in the physical therapy department at Mercy College. I go to school with somebody at a different program, so I work with physical therapists to some extent at various times of the year, whether it's Mercy or a few other programs. I've talked to a few programs and multiple people, multiple people have told me you have to be careful about physical therapy right now. As of right now, everybody wants to be a PT. And this is their words, not mine, right? In fact, one person has strongly suggested that people go the route of another career unless you're 100% dedicated to PT because in the next few years, um, to get into school is going to be extremely competitive. This is not telling, I'm not telling you to just forget about PT. I'm just telling you guys to, okay, sorry, something just happened. Stop running. All right, sorry. I'm only telling you this to give you guys an awareness of what other physical therapists have told me, right? It's going to be tough, right? So especially if you are interested, it's good that you're listening to this because you're going to have to differentiate yourself. Not every exercise science, kinesiology, biology major is going to get into a PT program, right? Because that's right now, that's what it is, right? 60, 70% of people within these programs want to be a PT, right? And it's not going to work out like that, right? So you have to start to differentiate yourself now, okay? You guys know all these things. Your school needs to be accredited. You have to be licensed in your state. Your governing body is APTA. And then, and probably one of the reasons why you want to be a PT is because the average salary is higher than all these other careers, right? I even threw in the PTA average salary again, which is kind of nice for somebody who goes to school for 2 years as an option. And then finally, the text does list a few other careers: a therapeutic recreation specialist. Um, there is a certification that only requires a bachelor, so that's another option, just like the certified exercise physiologist, where it doesn't require a master's. And then finally is the strength and conditioning specialist. Additionally, it also requires a bachelor's, and that's certified by the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Um, Again, I don't really feel that a strength and conditioning specialist is a therapeutic expert. However, they do to some extent have to deal with therapeutic exercise because, like I said, the injury rate is 100%. So that's pretty much it in terms of careers. Um, this should give you guys just an overview of options out there. All right. If you guys have any questions, let me know.